Say No and Fly Away, written by Elaine Reese Wyman and illustrated by Rita Friedman. Say no and fly away. Nellie Nuthatch and her 4 nuthatches are Mr. N's friends. Mr. N helped Nellie take care of the nuthatches when they were babies. Mr. N loves the nuthatches, and the nuthatches love Mr. N. One day, Nellie Nuthatch has to fly north for a short visit. My nuthatches are old enough to take care of themselves now, Nellie says to Mr. N, but I do not want them to fly about late at night. Can you please check to see if they are in their birdhouse at bedtime? I'm happy to help, says Mr. N. I can sit under the tree near the birdhouse tonight. You may if you want to, says Nellie, but it is not necessary. The nuthatches are not babies anymore. Nellie flies away. Mr. N says to the nuthatches, I'll be back at bedtime. Tonight I'll sit under your tree, just like when you were babies. It will be fun to have Mr. N sit under our tree again, says one of the nuthatches. No, it won't, says Newly Nuthatch. We won't be able to fly around at night and stay up late. But I know a way to keep Mr. N busy. Come, follow me. The nuthatches follow Newly to Mr. N's house. Take the numbers off Mr. N's house, says Newly. Wait, these numbers do not belong to us, says the nuthatches. It does not matter, says Newly. We're only going to borrow them. Never mind, you're being babies. I'll do it myself. So Newly took the numbers off of Mr. N's house. Newly flies from house to house, taking the numbers. Newly, are you sure this is not wrong to take the numbers? Asked the nuthatches. There's nothing wrong with borrowing, says Newly. Well, then I guess we'll help you, said the nuthatches. All afternoon, the nuthatches fill bags of numbers. Put all the numbers in the tree, says Newly. Then go in the birdhouse, and when you hear Mr. N, pretend you're asleep. Before long, the nuthatches hear Mr. N's noisy nose. Mr. N looks inside the birdhouse, and the nuthatches are asleep, he says. Newly waits until Mr. N sits down under the tree, and he starts to drop the numbers. Numbers are falling all around Mr. N. He runs this way and that way, trying to catch all the numbers. I think these numbers came from people's houses, said Mr. N. I need to find out where they belong. See, whispers Newly. Now Mr. N will be busy all night long. We can fly about and stay up late. Come on. Mr. N walks from neighbor's house to neighbor's house. Everywhere he looks, the numbers are missing from the houses. I'll try to put all the numbers back where they belong, says Mr. N. He works hard all night long, and he's very tired. But Mr. N makes many mistakes. The next morning, people have wrong addresses on their house. Mr. N is so tired he sleeps until noon, and he does not know about the confusion the wrong addresses caused. The Ning's newspaper is delivered to the Nettles house, and the Newberry's mail is put in Navarro's mailbox. Mr. N's neighbors call him. Mr. N, they say, why do you have the right address on your house, but we do not? Ooh, I must have put the wrong numbers on your houses, says Mr. N. But why did you take the numbers off our houses? Ask the neighbors. Mr. N explains how the numbers were falling from the sky. How strange, said the neighbors. Let's work together to put the numbers back where they belong. The neighbors work together, and soon everyone has the correct address. The nuthatchers sleep all day because they were up all night. They did not know about the wrong addresses. When they wake up, they say, Newly, we want to be sure all the numbers are back on the houses. So the nuthatches fly from house to house. See, says Newly Nuthatch, I told you nothing bad would happen. Look, the numbers are back where they belong. Newly, we're still not sure it's right to borrow numbers, said the nuthatches. Don't be babies. Do what I say, insists Newly. Just then the clock strikes. "Hey, let's take the numbers off all the outdoor clocks," says Newly. "Then we'll have more numbers to drop on Mr. N tonight." "Newly, I don't think we should listen to you," says one of the nuthatchers. "Oh, you're just being a baby," says Newly. Not one of the nuthatchers wanted to be called a baby. They were afraid to say no to Newly. The nuthatches remove all the numbers from the clocks. They take the numbers back to the tree. Later that night, Mr. N sits under the tree. Soon, numbers start falling all around him again. "Why do these numbers fall around me night after night?" wonders Mr. N. "People are going to be thinking that I took the numbers." The nuthatcher sees that Mr. N is upset. "Newly, we must tell Mr. N that we borrowed the numbers," they said. "No," says Newly, "I don't want to get in trouble." "Let everyone think Mr. N took the numbers." "Newly, this time we are not going to listen to you. We know you are wrong," said the nuthatches. "Oh, you're just being a bunch of babies," said Newly. "We don't care what you call us," said the nuthatchers. And they fly down to Mr. N. And Newly Nuthatch flies away as fast as he can. The nuthatchers tell Mr. N what they did. "Well, I'm glad you're telling me the truth," says Mr. N. "It is wrong to take anything that does not belong to you. It is wrong to borrow unless you ask permission first." "Well, Newly made us do it," said the nuthatches. "He called us babies. It's all Newly's fault." "Well, Newly was wrong, and I will speak to him," says Mr. N. "But each one of you were also wrong, too." "Listen to me very carefully," says Mr. N. "Never do anything you think may be wrong. I don't care if someone calls you a baby. You are a big bird, not a baby bird, when you refuse to do something wrong. Don't be afraid to say no. Say no and fly away." "Watch us, Mr. N," said the nuthatches. "This is what we will do next time." Mr. N watches as the nuthatches say no and fly away. The next day, the nuthatches fly to Mr. N's house. "Mr. N, can we borrow something from you if we ask for permission first?" asked the nuthatches. "Why, of course," says Mr. N. "What would you like to borrow?" "Well, you have a box filled with letters of the alphabet. Can we borrow some of them?" "Are you going to put letters on the clocks instead of numbers?" asked Mr. N. "Oh, no," says the nuthatches. "Newly wants to put the numbers back on the clocks by himself. He is sorry that he was naughty. But we need the letters for a very important reason. Look up in the sky tomorrow and you will see." The next morning, an unusual cloud floats in the sky. On it is a message from the nuthatchers. It says, "Be a big bird. Say no and fly away."